Wait, let's see. That's so much better. I'm not yellow. Oh, that's exciting. This month was a shit reading month. It was so bad. If you have already seen my April Tarot TBR vlog, you will know there were many, many DNFs. I DNF'd 8 books this month. For context, in January, February and March, I DNF'd 4 books each. So I've doubled that this month. I also read so many more books. I read 2 more books than last month. So I read 19 books in total and I DNF'd 8, which is obscene. I said I was slowing down this month and I thought I was. I just ended up picking up a lot of novellas. There were a lot of novellas on my TBR that I finally got around to. And I found a lot of them on audiobooks. So I just played a lot of Stardew Valley and listened to a lot of audiobooks. And that is why that number is so high. Because if you look at the page count difference, I only read 600 more pages than last month. So I read 6,638 books. Pages, not books. Okay, we're gonna unscramble my brain at some point. I am scraping the barrel a little bit and I have found you 4 books that I wish to actually say positive things about and actively recommend to you. So thank you, pat on the back. And I'm not sure I really want to talk about any of the shit ones, partly because do I really want to go there, but also a lot of the shit ones were shit because they just weren't for me rather than they were actively shit books. I take it back. There are 2 books that I want to talk about because they're shit. So we're going to talk about 6 books in this video today. Let's start off with the first book that I read this month that actually brought me quite a lot of joy, and that was Sunbringer by Hannah Kaner. This is the second book in the Godkiller, I think it's a trilogy series, and I was a little bit worried about this one. I was quite worried this was going to be bad. It was not bad, it was really good. So you know how normally in sequels there's like the first book's great and then there's a dip in the sequel because kind of the interest has petered off, the tension and the suspense has just kind of dropped? No, I don't know how she did it, but Hannah Kaner managed to keep that like taut throughout. It was just like one solid taut line of suspense and intrigue throughout both books. So I was really impressed. Some solid representation. If you want really good fantasy with disabled main characters along with disabled secondary and tertiary characters, queer representation, autism representation that I thought was really well done, diverse cast, actually interesting plot that isn't too hard to get a hold of in your head. I would really, really recommend Sunbringer. Obviously read Godkiller first, like that's how series works. But this series, on the whole, very good. I really enjoyed it. It's a good, solid adult fantasy series. And I just really love the concept of gods existing because we believe in them. And gods kind of being powered by prayer and worship. And I just think that's handled and played with really well in this series. So happy to recommend that one. The second book that I really enjoyed this month was The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I loved his Foundryside trilogy. I really, really enjoyed it. And I was very excited to hear that he was coming out with a Sherlock Holmesian series. I think it's a trilogy. There's obviously only one book out at the moment, but that's set in like a biochemical world. So imagine if feudal Japan had giant leviathans and shit living in the sea that were constantly trying to come up on land and kill everyone. So naturally you build rings and rings of walls, yeah, around the main cities. So that's what they've done in this world. But also they get all their science and their like magic from plants and fungi. So like they have a particular fungus that they breed for air conditioning units. It like sucks in the air and it cleans it and it spits it out cooler. Isn't that cool? They have grafts, like I think it's like plant-based grafts that they implant into themselves and they can do different things. So like the Sherlock Holmesy character has grafts on her fingertips that are really rare, which means she can read just by like touching paper. She doesn't need her eyes at all. And often she wears a blindfold most of the time because she is autistic coded and finds the world very overstimulating. So a lot of the time she just goes around in a blindfold because she doesn't need any more stimulation than that to understand the world. And this whole book stems from the murder of someone quite high ranking who is found with this plant growing out of him that has exploded out of his body and shot these like stems and roots up in a couple of minutes, which is very unusual. So naturally, Watson is sent in, except Watson's not called Watson. I've forgotten his actual name, but he is the most lawfully good character that I have read in a long time, and I actually really enjoyed it. So yeah, if you're looking for like a really cool mystery and you want like the pinnacle of amazing mysteries, this is not it. The mystery is the least fun bit about this book. No, the mystery is the least interesting part about this book. But the world is fantastic, and together it's a nice parcel. I have done a dedicated review for this as prompted by my tarot prompts from my TBR vlog. That will be coming out early June, I think, because I had so many things on my roster of like scheduling. There will be a dedicated review out for that at some point. So look forward to that. Let's talk about one I didn't like, shall we? Let's just do a quick one that I really didn't like. I really didn't like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I got 50% of the way through this audiobook. This is a 1,000 and something stupid page novel. The audiobook is over 30, it's like 40, hang on, let me check. The audiobook is 32 hours and 30 minutes. I listened on 2 times speed because that's who I am as a person. Then I bumped it up to 2.5 times speed because it wasn't interesting enough. Susanna Clarke loves to write middle-aged white men who are boring and dislikable, like actively dislikable. That's how she deliberately writes them. This fucking book was so full of mediocre, uninteresting white men, it spoiled the story. I don't understand how you could fill a book this large with so much shit. She went on so many tangents that were not relevant at all. She talked about so many characters that are literally just one line in the story, and there will be nearly a whole chapter dedicated to them and who they are and how they got to be part of that story. I don't like it. I don't care if it's a stylistic thing. That to me is a sign of lazy writing. That is a sign of lazy editing. Someone needed to come and chop that book in half. At its core, I read the Wikipedia synopsis when I DNF'd this because I was not having a good time. Really disappointed that this book was so poorly edited because it makes it unbearably boring. Just unbearably boring. Why are we talking about this man in the Navy who we're not going to talk about again for another 350 pages? And even then, he's going to be a footnote because there are so many footnotes. If I had been reading this with my eyeballs, no, it wouldn't have happened. The audiobook just reads the footnotes straight away, like it doesn't break from the text. So I wasn't really aware that they were happening. I flipped to a page in that book, and the first page I landed to was just a page of footnotes. If your footnote is a page long, it either needs to be cut or included in the main text. That is unnecessary. This is a fictional fantasy book. If you wanted to make it that long, make it 3 books. I really didn't enjoy that. I didn't. There were a couple of moments that I was like, oh, this could be interesting. And then she just stopped talking about it and she moved on to something else that was so uninteresting. I don't understand people that have read this all the way through and have nothing bad to say about it. I understand why people would like it. I do, but it's not for me. And I resent the 14 hours I wasted listening to that sodding book. Moving on to something more positive, I read Black Shield Maiden by Willow Smith. Yes, that Willow Smith. And Jess Hendel. This is a YA, I want to say fantasy. There's only a very small element of fantasy. It reads like historical fiction about Yafeu. It's pronounced Yafeu, I think, who comes from a pseudo-Ghanaian country that I think is supposed to be Ghana from sort of Norse time period. But she is taken from her home in circumstances that I won't spoil, and she ends up in Norway as a thrall for the king of a town whose name I have already forgotten. But there she meets Freydis, who is the princess of that town. And it's a story about a black girl in Viking lands, basically. Something that was very much a part of history and just isn't really talked about or isn't touched on. Willow Smith has a letter, sort of author's note at the beginning of the book discussing sort of about the research that went into this and how it's really, and the importance of like bringing black voices and black representation to the parts of history where they existed but have just been erased. And I think it's a really important book for young adult readers. I think it's well done. It is a standalone as well. This is not a duology, not a trilogy. It's a standalone book. It's a little bit on the chunky side. It's 460 pages, which is, I think that's chunky, but I think it's really well done. The story does start quite slow, but I think that's needed. Like, knowing what I do now about the end of the book, it's important. So I would, if you find the beginning slow, I would persevere until you get to Norway. And then once you get to Norway, if you don't like it then that's fine. That's the point I would give yourself to make that decision. But I really, really enjoyed this. I thought the characters really well fleshed out. There were a lot of characters and I was able to tell them all apart really easily. It's a triple POV, and I will leave the third point of view as a surprise, but it's done really well. It talks about power and courage and feminism, and Yefeu is the kind of protagonist that you need for a YA novel. She kicks ass. She doesn't take any shit. She was raised right, and she shakes up this town in the best way possible, and I really highly recommend it. I went into this thinking, oh god, here's another celebrity that's sort of half-assed, like, tried to write a book. So I don't know how much input there was from either Willow Smith or Jess Hendel, but A, I appreciate that she's not hiding the name of her ghostwriter. She's not claiming she wrote this on her own, and B, I think they pulled it off. I think they did a really good job. So yeah, that's my recommendation. The other recommendation is Yoke of Stars by R.B. Lemberg. R.B. Lemberg is a queer by gender poet and professor, I believe, and has written a whole host of novellas set in this one world, and this is the 6th novella in that world, but you can read them all out of order, and this is the first one I read and it all made sense to me. This is a really beautiful novella that I have written a full-length review of for the Fantasy Hive. I've also written a review for Black Shield Maiden. They'll be coming out soon. I will link them down below if they're out when I post this. All the reviews that I post on Fantasy Hive, there is always a link in my description for that, along with my Instagram and my TikTok and my Facebook and all of that shit. So I loved this novella. I thought it was really well done. I think it packed a punch in the 200 pages that this story occupies. I think it was deftly written. You can tell a poet wrote this in a really good way. We follow Stone Orphan, who is an assassin's apprentice, and she is met by Ulene, who is supposed to give her the name for someone that she can kill, give her a job. But instead they have a conversation, and it drags up in like a really natural, organic way all the trauma that they've both experienced in their lives, and they discuss that, and they discuss the different cultures that they both come from and they both live in, and they acknowledge the differences in a really healthy, open-minded way. And there's discussions of language, the way that language is used, the way that language evolves, and that sort of stems a conversation about pronouns and the way that we refer to people. And there's conversations about domestic violence and power and bodily autonomy and all these really important conversations that we're having in the world today. These two characters have a 200-page conversation about this, and it just sort of makes you sit back and go, why are we having so much debate when they've just laid it all out so clearly and so obviously? Like, why are these issues still contentious? I just really loved it. It's beautiful. It's a little novella. It doesn't take a lot of brain space to read it and to understand it. And it's a really unique fantasy world that it's set in as well. So I highly recommend this. And then to finish it off, let's finish off with a slightly snarky one, shall we? I read The Hemlock Queen by Hannah Witten. I was really disappointed by this. I quite enjoyed the first book. I thought it was a cool idea. It's got death magic and life magic and these dead gods that they funnel power from, and it's a really interesting concept. But this second book flopped so hard. It did not need to be 450 pages long. Nope, didn't need to be that long. I think this book suffered from the author focusing too much on her her two main characters and then the sort of 3 tertiary ones. And just focusing on them and not really doing a lot of telling about what was happening in the rest of the world, but not doing a lot of showing. So it felt really like these characters were in a spotlight. and these characters kept saying the same things over and over and over, and making these same decisions over and over again. And like, one person would make a decision and talk about something to one character, and then they would go to another character and have the same conversation with like very little deviation, not deviance. And things happened in this story for not really a lot of reason. I think the author struggled, and I think that was obvious, and I think that's a shame. I will not be continuing the series. It just really didn't do it for me, and I'm not interested to see where things go after seeing where this book finished. I think the choices the characters made were stupid. I think a lot could have been done to prevent what happened at the end of this book, and it was sort of the author pleading ignorance or pretending, like ignoring the really obvious answer and then going for the really contrived solution just to make the story maybe a bit more interesting. I didn't vibe with it, so that was a really disappointing read. I read that one on NetGalley, but yeah, I will not be continuing this series. So those are some of the notable books that I read this month. If you want any more information about any of the other 19 books that I read, I have my April vlog is out now, and that covers a whole host of books. Yeah, if you are an Instagram person, go follow me on Instagram. If you are a fan of this channel, give me a little subscribe, please, because I'm very close to 300 followers at this point, and I'm quite excited to get over that hurdle. Yeah, stick around if you like this kind of video. I will see you in the next one, probably on a Sunday. Bye.